You know that innocent-sounding request for space? Laura Bennett didn't suspect a thing. Between one meeting and another, she received a short, cold message from Caesar Carter. I need some time to think. No phone call. No signs of trouble before. Just those dry words, like an empty glass being tipped upside down. Laura stared at her phone for a moment, unable to reply right away. She had known Caesar for almost 5 years, a relationship built on silences and concessions disguised as maturity. Respect was a word she carried like an invisible burden. So she respected it. She gave him the space he asked for. 3 days later, still no news. Laura continued her routine work, gym, the bitter coffee at the end of the afternoon. Nothing out of the ordinary, until a notification lit up her phone. A mutual friend had posted a series of pictures. Laura clicked without thinking. It was automatic. And there he was, Caesar, smiling, tanned, wineglass in hand, on a beach with turquoise waters. He wasn't alone. Next to him, looking just as comfortable and intimate, was a woman with golden hair, laughing at the camera as if the outside world didn't exist. Laura recognized her instantly. Valentina Moore, the persistent ghost from Caesar's past, the ex he swore he no longer had any contact with. Laura's stomach turned. This wasn't just a trip. It wasn't a break. It was betrayal, blatant and public. She slammed her phone down on the table. The sharp sound made the cafe waiter turn around, curious, but she didn't care. Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. She sat there, motionless, feeling the ground crack beneath her feet while forcing herself to stay upright. Her fingers nervously drummed on the edge of the cup. "Time to think," he said. But Laura knew this wasn't reflection. It was escape. An escape now gaining likes and cheerful comments on social media. With a swift move, she paid the bill and left. The street wind felt colder than before. As she rushed through the city blocks, each step echoed a question. What now? Her mind raced with emotional answers: call, confront, scream. But none seemed right. When she got home, she stared at the apartment door as if it could give her an answer. Inside, everything was still theirs. Carefully chosen paintings, books mixed together on the shelves, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the corners. Silent witnesses to a story that maybe had died long before that request for space. Laura took a deep breath. Closed her eyes for a few seconds. When she opened them, she was someone else. Without hesitation, she called a locksmith. It was Saturday, but urgency had a price and she was willing to pay it. While she waited, she walked through the living room like a stranger, looking at every object with disdain. This wasn't their home anymore. It was the territory of a woman who needed to rewrite her story. When the locksmith arrived, the exchange was quick. The metallic click of the new locks sounded like an anthem to her newfound freedom. As soon as he left, Laura locked the door, leaned against it, and let out the breath she'd been holding since the cafe. She grabbed her phone and, without giving herself a second to hesitate, blocked Caesar's number. There was no room for goodbyes or explanations. The one who asked for distance would now have to deal with the consequences. In the silence of the night, as she mentally listed what needed to be sorted out, one detail nagged her: the car Caesar used was under her name. A valuable asset that, if she didn't act fast, could turn into an even bigger headache. She grabbed the keys, stepped out again, and drove to the trusted dealership. The city seemed different that evening, tall buildings casting long shadows, streets emptier than usual. The ride was short, but every red light, every turn, weighed like an irreversible decision. When she got there, she was met with formal efficiency. As she signed the sale papers, she felt the burden of responsibility sliding off her shoulders. Each signature was like throwing a shovel of dirt over the remains of that relationship. Car sold, locks changed. It wasn't just about material protection, it was about rebuilding. About closing the doors and windows to what no longer deserved a place in her life physically or emotionally. On the way back home, Laura looked out the window of the rideshare. The city lights flickered indifferently to her pain. And in that moment, with the low hum of the engine and a random song playing on the radio, she realized their story had ended long before the request for time. She just hadn't accepted it yet. Acceptance wouldn't be easy. And Caesar had no idea the game, for him, was far from over. Laura's apartment was on the 11th floor of an old building in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. The walls carried the weight of the years, with dark wooden baseboards and heavy-framed windows, classic features of the region's architecture. The historic past of the city echoed their every detail, a reminder that, as cruel as time could be, it also brought resilience. Laura had chosen to live there for that very reason: tradition and endurance. Elements she now needed to find within herself. As she walked down the hallway, the silence still felt strange. Caesar's absence seemed to take up more space than his presence ever had. In the neighborhood, cobblestone streets and ancient trees created a peaceful atmosphere that clashed with the storm raging inside her. The corner park, where couples strolled with their dogs, now seemed like a bitter joke. It was strange how the city's routine carried on undisturbed while her personal life collapsed. Laura's friends, few but loyal, started showing up. The first was Samantha Reyes, a college friend and now a renowned attorney in town. Samantha had the kind of personality that could weather storms without even messing up her hair: practical, direct, and brutally honest. Sitting on the small balcony with 2 glasses of wine between them, Samantha didn't sugarcoat it. "Do you really think it was just that? Just asking for space?" She took a sip before continuing. "Caesar's always been a coward. You've always known that." Laura preferred to believe otherwise, that somewhere in the past, something real had existed. But Samantha left no room for illusions. "He didn't change, Laura. He just got better at hiding it." Between sips of wine, their conversation peeled back layers of the relationship Laura had tried to ignore. Caesar's business trips, his monosyllabic responses, his empty promises, small signs that now looked like flashing red lights she had refused to see. Throughout the week, more familiar faces appeared. Oliver Green, the neighbor from upstairs, offered to help move boxes and disassemble furniture. A man with a soft voice and observant eyes, he had been discreetly interested in Laura for months. But she, still trapped in the past, had never noticed. And, of course, the darker side of the story soon emerged. Valentina Moore wasn't just an ex-girlfriend. Daughter of a powerful local businessman, Valentina thrived in circles where status mattered more than character. Caesar, with his ambition masked as simplicity, had never been able to resist the glitter of easy opportunities. Laura learned that too late. As she pieced together the events, one persistent memory resurfaced: the charity gala 6 months ago. Caesar, tense, speaking to Valentina from a distance. She, laughing loudly, tossing her hair back. Back then, Laura hadn't suspected anything. She thought it was just polite conversation. Now, she saw it for what it really was. Charleston, with its subtle elegance and rigid traditions, was the perfect backdrop for a world of appearances. Laura, the daughter of a historian and a retired teacher, had always valued substance over image. That's what had blinded her. While she tried to build a relationship based on trust, Caesar was weaving lies with invisible threads. Her background, simple but solid, stood in stark contrast to Caesar and Valentina's thirst for social climbing. 2 worlds that had always been quietly on a collision course. As the days passed, Laura wasn't just reorganizing her apartment, she was rebuilding her identity. New pillows, new locks, new priorities. Each change a scar turned metal. Meanwhile, social media kept vomiting up images of Caesar and Valentina's vacation boat trips, fancy dinners, selfies at famous tourist spots. A picture-perfect life. A carefully curated lie. But Laura was no longer the same woman who had once received that request for space. Now, her movements carried a quiet determination. And one certainty: they would not walk away unscathed. It was just a matter of time. Laura's first move was discreet. No public confrontations, no angry phone calls. She preferred the silent strength of action. She consulted Samantha, who, as any good lawyer would, gave her first piece of advice. "You need to document everything, Laura," Samantha said, handing her a thin folder. "Screenshots, old conversations, anything that shows how this all started. If they step out of line, you'll already have ammunition." Laura spent that night digging through forgotten files. Cold conversations, sharp messages, old photos where Caesar's smile already seemed forced. Everything was now evidence. Not for a courtroom, not yet, but for herself. Reality, when laid out in words and pictures, carried a weight that was hard to ignore. Meanwhile, Caesar and Valentina's online parade continued. She in designer swimsuits, he holding her waist with an intimacy that left no doubts. It was as if they were determined to show the world what Laura had stumbled upon by accident. But Laura wouldn't be the one begging for explanations. Not this time. Selling the car was her next step. Laura knew Caesar loved to show off. A flashy car gave him the aura of success he craved. Taking that away hit harder than any bitter message ever could. When she signed the sale, it felt like the final goodbye. There were no material ties left between them. Only memories, and those she would learn to bury over time. But the real confrontation was still to come. The following week, a sharp knock echoed through her apartment. Laura peeked through the peephole. Caesar. Alone. Messy hair, tense expression. Like an actor unprepared for his own role. "Laura, we need to talk," he said as soon as she cracked the door open. She crossed her arms. "Talk about what, Caesar? About the space you needed?" He hesitated, uncomfortable. I made a mistake." Mistake. The word echoed in Laura's head like a poorly disguised insult. As if cheating was a trivial error, something that could be fixed with a few half-hearted apologies. "I'm not here to fight," he continued, trying to soften his tone. "I just want you to listen." Laura kept her expression neutral. Inside, it felt like a dam was about to break. But she wouldn't let him see that. "Listening doesn't mean forgiving," she replied, dry. Caesar shook his head, frustrated. "I didn't know what I was doing. It all happened so fast." Valentina reached out and Laura raised her hand, cutting him off. "It doesn't matter. What matters is you asked for space and ran straight into her arms. You made your choice." He tried to explain again, but Laura wasn't listening. Every word he spoke was hollow, meaningless. It was like watching a bad movie where the plot no longer surprised her. "I've already changed the locks," she said, her voice sharp and calm. "And I sold the car. There's nothing left tying us together, Caesar." The tension was palpable. Caesar stood silently for a few seconds, processing. Then, with a tired sigh, he stepped back. "You've changed," he said. Laura smirked. "Yeah, I have." Without waiting for another word, she shut the door. The click of the lock echoed louder than any argument could have. But Caesar wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Days later, Laura received a court summons, a lawsuit for emotional damages, claiming she had caused him moral harm by selling the car. Samantha reacted quickly. She built a solid defense, backed by documents. Laura had already gathered proof the car was legally in her name, evidence of Caesar's public betrayal, testimonies from mutual friends. While the legal battle brewed, Laura faced another war, the emotional one. Caesar's attempts at contact didn't stop. Calls from unknown numbers, anonymous social media messages, indirect messages through acquaintances. It was as if he was desperately trying to maintain some toxic link. And Valentina didn't fade away either. Quite the opposite. She seemed determined to rub her presence in Laura's face through provocative posts or malicious rumors spread by mutual friends. Laura, however, stayed strong. Every attack was met with the same calculated silence. No emotional responses, no public outbursts. Just actions. Selling the car, blocking contacts, handling the lawsuit with documents, not tears. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the control was finally in her hands. But this wasn't the end. Caesar and Valentina still had cards up their sleeves. And Laura, though stronger, knew her fight for peace was only beginning. While the main tension simmered in the background, Laura's life unfolded in new layers of quiet conflicts and discoveries. Oliver Green, the kind neighbor from upstairs, started showing up more often. First, it was casual encounters in the elevator, then quick chats about the weather or the city's traffic chaos. Until one afternoon, he knocked on her door with an unexpected offer. "I made too much dinner," he said, holding up a covered plate. "Thought you might want some company." Laura, hesitant at first, accepted. Not because she was ready for new connections, but because there was something comforting in Oliver's simplicity. No intrusive questions, no judgment, just presence. Their improvised dinner nights became routine, and over time, Oliver revealed more about his own life. He worked as a photographer for a local travel magazine, had lived alone since an amicable divorce after a 5-year marriage, and preferred observing the world through lenses, not through social media. "You know, Laura," he said one evening while pouring wine, "some people need an audience to exist. I prefer living in what's real." His simple words resonated deeply with Laura. It was a striking contrast to the public, performative life Caesar and Valentina flaunted. And, without realizing it, Oliver started filling spaces Laura didn't even know were empty. But not everything was smooth sailing. With the exposure of the betrayal and the lawsuit underway, unexpected side effects began to appear. Laura started noticing sideways glances at work, hushed conversations in office hallways, the kind of gossip that spreads poison invisibly but deeply. Samantha was the first to warn her. "Valentina has connections. She'll use whatever she can to damage your image." It wasn't hard to believe. Valentina came from a powerful family with deep political and business ties. A well-placed rumor was enough to destroy reputations. Determined not to cave, Laura reinforced her professional stance. She avoided unnecessary comments, focused on her results, and shielded herself from any provocations. She had learned, through pain, that maturity meant resisting the urge to retaliate and instead responding with excellence. Meanwhile, Samantha discovered something crucial. Valentina was involved in a confidential financial investigation, falsified documents, money laundering at charity events. Information that, if leaked, could change the entire game in Laura's favor. "I know what you're thinking," Samantha said, showing her the evidence. "But be patient. This is our ace up the sleeve, not our war cry." Laura knew that if she truly wanted to win, she had to be strategic. It wasn't enough to expose Valentina, she needed to bring her down at the right time. The tension grew daily. Caesar, frustrated by Laura's silence, intensified his attempts to contact her, veiled threats through anonymous messages, malicious insinuations online, and mutual friends pressuring her to give him another chance. But Laura had learned. She shielded herself from the attacks as if wearing invisible armor. Deep down, she knew those who panic lose. Meanwhile, Oliver remained a steady presence, no rush, no demands. One calm night, he confided. Sometimes, we have to lose what we thought was essential to discover who we really are. Laura smiled. For the first time in months, it was a genuine smile. Between quiet dinners, legal battles, and poisonous rumors, she was slowly, deliberately charting the course of her own reconstruction. There was still a long road ahead. But now, Laura wasn't the woman who once trembled at the mere request for space. She was someone who understood deeply that some doors need to stay closed forever. The night everything changed started like any other. Laura was finishing organizing some papers when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No name, no context, just a short sentence. If you knew the truth about Valentina, you wouldn't sleep so peacefully. For months, she had ignored anonymous provocations, but something about this message felt different. It wasn't an open threat. It felt like a clue, an invitation. Against her instinct to dismiss it, Laura replied simply, "Prove it." Minutes later, an email arrived. No subject line, no signature. Attached was a document that, at first glance, seemed irrelevant, a series of financial transactions linked to charity events organized by Valentina. Suspicious transfers, numbers that didn't match the publicly reported fundraising, offshore accounts. Laura immediately forwarded the file to Samantha. The phone rang almost instantly. "This is pure gold," Samantha said, barely containing her excitement. "But we have to play it smart." In the days that followed, Samantha and her team put together a detailed dossier. Everything by the book. If used correctly, the evidence could not only neutralize Valentina but also end the lawsuit Caesar had filed. Meanwhile, Oliver, unaware of the brewing storm, remained Laura's steady harbor. One night, as they walked through the dimly lit park, he suddenly stopped. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his expression serious. "Of course. Can you trust someone again?" The simple question pierced Laura like a silent arrow. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything she had been carrying since the moment Caesar asked for space. She didn't answer right away. She just smiled, small, cautious, as if still searching for the answer inside herself. "I'm learning," she finally replied. Oliver nodded, respecting the silence that followed. On the day of the preliminary hearing for Caesar's lawsuit, Laura arrived at the courthouse with Samantha by her side. Caesar and Valentina were already there. He looked nervous, she was arrogant, fiddling with her phone like it was all just an inconvenience. The room was small, functional. Few benches, cold lighting. A judge with a tired expression, more interested in clearing his docket than hearing personal dramas. Caesar laid out his complaints, claimed emotional distress, financial hardship, damage to his reputation. Samantha, calm as ever, simply asked for the floor. "Your Honor," she began, "we would like to present documents proving illicit activities associated with the plaintiff's companion, information that calls into question not only the moral standing of his company but also the credibility of his claims." She handed a folder to the judge. He flipped through it quickly, his expression hardening with each page. Valentina, previously bored, turned pale. After a few minutes of reviewing the documents, the judge looked at Caesar and Valentina as if he had just unraveled a farce. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Moore, I strongly advise you to reconsider your legal actions. This court takes fraud allegations seriously, and if necessary, appropriate measures will be taken." Caesar exchanged a desperate look with Valentina, who simply got up, grabbed her purse, and left without looking back. Her exit was as swift as the beginning of their new relationship had been. Without her backing, Caesar was exposed and vulnerable. He muttered something inaudible and then agreed to drop the lawsuit without any further costs to Laura. Outside the courthouse, Laura took a deep breath. The air felt different, lighter. "Now what?" she asked Samantha. Now? Samantha smiled. Now it's your turn to live, Laura. That night, back at her apartment, Laura kicked off her shoes and let her bare feet feel the coolness of the floor. The house was silent but not empty. For the first time in a long time, the silence was comforting. She grabbed her phone and sent a short message to Oliver. "Dinner tomorrow?" The reply came quickly. "Only if you're cooking." Laura laughed to herself, feeling a peace that had seemed unreachable for months. The turning point hadn't just been in the courtroom. It had been inside her. Laura Bennett was no longer a woman who accepted scraps disguised as love. She was someone who had learned, with every fall, to rise stronger. And this time, she wasn't falling again. The end of the lawsuit didn't close all the battles, but it gave Laura something she hadn't had in a long time: room to breathe. In the days following the hearing, Caesar vanished from social media. Valentina, however, wasn't so lucky. The discreet exposure had consequences: no public scandal, but in Charleston's high society circles, news spread like wildfire. Invitations dried up, sponsorships disappeared. And though she tried to maintain her facade, it was clear her influence was crumbling. Laura, meanwhile, chose silence. No confrontations, no headlines. Her victory didn't need an audience: it was personal, intimate, and all the sweeter for it. As the storm calmed, the world around her began to shift. At work, suspicious glances were replaced by cautious respect. Not compassion that would be too much to expect, but a clear understanding that Laura wasn't someone easily brought down. Samantha, ever pragmatic, summed it up best. People respect those who survive their own ruins. And Laura had survived. Not unscathed, but whole in a new, stronger way. As she rebuilt her life, Laura also deepened her connection with Oliver. No rush, no promises. Just quiet dinners, sunset walks, conversations about photography, books, and the trips they might take one day. "When was the last time you traveled?" he asked one evening as they strolled along the quiet shoreline. Laura thought for a moment. "Before Caesar. It's been years." "Then it's time to change that." The simplicity of the suggestion made her smile. No pressure, no demands. Just possibilities. But not everything was perfect. Caesar's subtle attempts to reconnect still lingered: a private number calling and hanging up, fake profiles viewing her stories, small gestures betraying a silent obsession. Laura, however, knew how to handle it now. Blocking wasn't just digital, it was emotional, psychological. Caesar was now a shadow, powerless against the walls she had built. One Saturday morning, while sipping coffee on her balcony, she received an anonymous letter. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single sheet with a handwritten line. "Some doors should never be closed." Laura smirked. The veiled threat was pathetic, a confirmation of what she already knew: Caesar couldn't stand losing. But she could accept losing what was never truly hers. And that's why she was winning. Without hesitation, she tore the letter into pieces and tossed them in the trash. Then, she sent a quick text to Samantha. "Got another anonymous note. Just for the record." The reply was swift. No response, no reaction. They give up when they find nothing to cling to. Laura took the advice to heart. She kept moving forward. Day by day, small changes reinforced her new reality: cooking classes, afternoons at the park, evenings lost in old books. Quiet rediscoveries that filled the spaces left by old wounds. As time passed, memories of Caesar and Valentina lost their grip. They didn't disappear, scars never do, but they stopped hurting. They became old stories, told softly and without emotion. But the most profound change was this: Laura was no longer the same woman. She had learned to say no, to protect herself, to value her peace above anyone else's persistence. And, most importantly, she understood that some defeats are actually victories in disguise. Oliver, sensing her silences, respected her pace. He didn't rush, didn't pressure. He simply walked beside her, step by step, knowing that the best things take time. And Laura, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to believe that maybe something good could come from it. No rush. No fear. Laura's life began to change without grand announcements, without dramatic revolutions. It was like a tide slowly washing away what no longer served her. She rediscovered the joy in simple things, walking barefoot through her freshly renovated apartment, tending to the plants on her balcony, playing loud music while cooking slowly. Small rituals that once seemed trivial now carried the weight of daily victories. One day, while cleaning the bookshelf, she found an old copy of Virginia Woolf, marked on a page that read, "Each must find their own way of living." Laura smiled. She hadn't read those words when she needed them most. Now, they felt like they were written just for her. It was also during this time that she decided to return to therapy. No shame, no hesitation. She needed to put her inner house in order just as she had with her apartment. And it was there, sitting in the small blue chair in her therapist's office, that she understood something simple and transformative. Caesar wasn't the cause of her pain, he was merely the mirror she had been afraid to face. "You don't need to erase what you've lived through," her therapist said during one session. "You need to understand that what brought you here doesn't define you. What you do from here on out does." Those words, anchored in clarity, stayed with Laura in the months that followed. With Oliver, the relationship unfolded like a quiet, untangled ribbon. He was patient, present without being suffocating, respecting her silences and celebrating her small victories. One night, Laura finally shared the details: the lawsuit, the betrayal, the fall, and the rebuilding. Oliver simply listened. No judgment, no attempt to fix her. "I think courage is this," he said after a long silence. "Still being yourself after everything tried to break you." Laura didn't respond. But she knew, in that moment, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The evolution wasn't linear. There were setbacks. Days when she woke up with the past pressing on her chest, nights when the silence of the house screamed with memories. But now she knew how to handle it. She didn't run from the pain. She faced it, understood it, breathed deeply, and moved on. Emotional independence wasn't the absence of pain, it was the maturity not to drown in it. At work, Laura was promoted to project coordinator. Not out of pity, but because of merit. Her quiet dedication, consistent results, and ability to handle crises had not gone unnoticed. Outside of work, she devoted herself to new hobbies: photography classes with Oliver, weekend trips to nearby towns, long afternoons lost in small bookstores. She rekindled old friendships, rebuilt forgotten bonds, and, most importantly, re-established her friendship with herself. A defining moment happened during a trip to an antique fair with Oliver. She spotted an old typewriter, rusted and forgotten, in a corner. Without thinking much, she bought it. Back home, she carefully cleaned the relic. When she finished, she sat in front of it and, with still hesitant fingers, began to type. Not a story about Caesar, Valentina, or betrayal. A story about Laura, not the one who had been betrayed, but the one who had survived. With each keystroke, it felt like she was sealing a promise to herself never to settle for less than she deserved again. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant understanding that scars were maps, not chains, marks of the journey taken, not shackles for the future. And Laura now walked lightly, aware that true strength isn't about resisting the fall, it's about choosing, every day, to rise differently. One quiet evening, as she watched the deep red sunset from her living room window, Oliver came closer and, without saying a word, took her hand. She squeezed back, firmly. It was simple. It was real. And for the first time in a long time, Laura wasn't afraid. She felt hopeful. The calm Laura had built didn't go unnoticed by everyone. While she quietly rebuilt her life, Caesar, on the other side of the city, was falling apart. Mutual friends always cautious mentioned he seemed unstable, irritable, on the verge of losing the last shred of his carefully curated public image. Laura wasn't naive. She knew people like Caesar didn't accept defeat gracefully. And she knew that sooner or later, he would try to stage one final dramatic act. It didn't take long for the prediction to come true. One afternoon, returning from a therapy session, Laura found a letter slipped under her door. It wasn't like the previous ones, anonymous and threatening. This was different. It was addressed to her, in Caesar's familiar handwriting, with a strange heaviness to the fold. Inside was a note and an old photo of the two of them smiling on a beach in the early days of their relationship. The note read simply, "Don't throw it all away like this." Laura stared at the picture for a few seconds. She didn't feel anger or nostalgia. She felt pity that he didn't understand it had all been thrown away long before they reached this point. She took a deep breath, tore the picture and the note into pieces, and tossed them in the trash without ceremony. The next day, Samantha showed up at her apartment, her face serious. "The summons arrived," she said, handing over an envelope. "He's filed another lawsuit. This time for defamation." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Based on what?" Samantha shrugged, annoyed. "An interview you never gave. An article you never wrote. He's desperate, Laura. And like any desperate person, he's trying to drag you down with him." Laura felt the pressure in her chest but didn't flinch. She wasn't that scared, vulnerable woman anymore. She knew Caesar's game was driven by reactions. And the greatest victory would be not giving him what he wanted. "Well, respond," she said. "As always. No drama, no stage." Samantha smiled. This calm, strategic coldness was what Laura had learned over time. As the legal battle built up again, Laura strengthened her defenses. She minimized her public exposure, locked down her social media, and warned close friends not to share any personal information. Oliver, ever discreet, stayed by her side. He never asked more than Laura wanted to share. And that, more than any speech of support, was exactly what she needed: respect for her space. Meanwhile, Laura was informed by a work colleague that Valentina was also facing troubles. After the fraud accusations, sponsorship contracts were cancelled, and the Moore family quietly distanced themselves from their problematic daughter. It wasn't active revenge, just the natural consequence of bad choices. Still, Laura didn't celebrate. She now understood that true victory wasn't watching those who wronged you fall, it was building a future where they no longer existed. The atmosphere, however, remained tense. Even with all her precautions, Laura knew the lawsuit would bring hearings, testimonies, and new attempts at exposure. And unlike the first time, Caesar seemed more aggressive. It was a race against time. Samantha prepared the defense. Laura fortified herself emotionally. And in between, she built small routines with Oliver that reminded her there was still life beyond the battles. Simple dinners, quiet coffees, quick trips to nearby towns. Nothing grand, nothing flashy. Just normalcy. Just peace. And it was that peace Laura knew she had to protect no matter the cost. The tension was mounting. The hearing was approaching. Laura knew this would be the real climax of the story. And this time, she would be ready. The day of the hearing dawned cloudy, as if the city itself could sense the tension in the air. Laura woke up early, reviewed the documents one last time, and dressed with the strategic simplicity Samantha always advised: discreet, elegant, nothing that could be used against her. Oliver showed up at her door minutes before she left. He didn't say anything. He simply held her hand for a moment, gave a gentle squeeze, and smiled calmly. A simple gesture, but Laura carried it like invisible armor to the courthouse. Outside the courtroom, Caesar was already waiting, flanked by a new lawyer, more aggressive, more incisive. Caesar himself seemed different. Less confident, more restless. The months had left marks on him, but not erased his arrogance. The hearing started on time. The same judge from before presided, wearing the weary expression of someone who had seen it all and perhaps had already guessed what kind of story he was about to hear. Caesar laid out his accusations, claimed Laura had defamed him, damaged his reputation, caused him emotional and financial harm. Laura stayed silent while Samantha dismantled the allegations with surgical precision. She presented proof that Laura had never given interviews, never posted about Caesar on social media, had never even made indirect comments. The only exposure the plaintiff faced, Samantha said, pausing deliberately, was caused by his own actions and by the public behavior of his companion, extensively documented. Caesar's lawyer tried to push back, suggesting Laura had orchestrated a silent smear campaign. But Samantha was ready. She revealed conversations where Caesar had portrayed himself as a victim to mutual acquaintances, but without any evidence to support his narrative. The hearing was tense but controlled until the judge asked Laura to speak. She took a deep breath, looked at the judge, then at Caesar, and finally within herself. She knew this was the decisive moment. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady for a long time, "I thought silence was weakness. That not responding to provocations meant accepting defeat. But I've learned that real power is not letting those who hurt you continue to define you." She paused, measuring every word. "I didn't defame anyone. I survived. In silence, because shouting wouldn't bring back my dignity. My actions have always been defensive, never offensive. I didn't start this war, but I won't run from it." The judge watched her intently. Samantha, discreetly, nodded in approval. Laura continued. "I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to protect what I've built: my peace, my life, my right to move forward without carrying weights that don't belong to me." The silence that followed was heavy. The judge jotted down some notes, briefly reviewed the documents, and in just a few minutes, announced his decision: the lawsuit was dismissed. Case closed. No immediate appeal. Caesar's eyes widened in disbelief. His lawyer tried to say something but was cut off by a sharp gesture from the judge. Laura felt the air shift. It wasn't euphoria, it was relief. As she gathered her documents, she didn't even look at Caesar. Not out of fear, out of indifference. He no longer had any power over her. Valentina wasn't there either. Perhaps she had finally understood that some battles aren't worth showing up for. Outside, the cloudy afternoon was breaking into patches of light. Oliver waited for her, leaning casually against the car. As she approached, he asked, "Is it over?" Laura smiled, tired but relieved. "It's over." They drove in silence for a few blocks. Then Oliver broke the quiet. "So, what now? What are you going to do?" Laura looked out the window, at the city that had witnessed her fall and her rise. "Live," she said with a calm smile. "Just live." Oliver smiled back, and without hurry, drove toward the sunset now peeking timidly through the scattered clouds. Laura leaned back in her seat, allowing herself finally to rest. She knew new challenges would come, that's just life, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face them with her head held high. She was no longer the betrayed, humiliated, broken woman. She was the woman who chose to rebuild, and she had won. In the months that followed, Laura's life found a new rhythm, a smooth and steady beat, built with her own hands. The lawsuit was behind her, along with all the remnants of a story that no longer belonged to her. Caesar disappeared completely from her orbit. No new lawsuits, no letters, no ghosts haunting her nights. Silence, once feared, was now a welcome companion. Laura gave her apartment a final makeover. She painted the walls in light tones, replaced the furniture, swapped out old pictures for photographs she had taken herself, fruits of the photography lessons she began taking with Oliver. With each new detail, she wasn't just rebuilding a physical space, she was rebuilding her inner home. True friendships grew stronger. Samantha remained a constant presence, now more as a friend than a lawyer, sharing coffees, movies, and long talks about everything and nothing. And with Oliver, the relationship blossomed slowly. No declarations of eternal love, no grand promises or suffocating expectations. Just presence. Companionship. Shared laughter and comfortable silences. The kind of relationship Laura hadn't even known was possible until she learned how to live with herself. One afternoon, sitting on the balcony, watching the sky turn orange and pink with the sunset, Laura realized something simple but powerful: she no longer carried the weight of the past. The memories were still there, of course. But now they were like scars, proof that she had survived, learned, and grown. She reached for the old typewriter and, with a soft smile, began to type. Not a story of pain, but a new story. Her story. A story of resilience, of rebuilding, of freedom. When she finished the first paragraph, she leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and smiled. Laura Bennett was no longer just a survivor of betrayal, of a lawsuit, of emotional warfare. She was the architect of her own peace. And it was only the beginning. Months later, on a bright spring morning, Laura closed the door to her apartment, and for the first time in a long time, she carried only a small suitcase and a quiet smile. On the passenger seat sat the old typewriter, the silent companion of her reconstruction. Oliver waited behind the wheel, patiently. "Ready?" he asked as she buckled her seatbelt. "I always have been," she replied. The car pulled away slowly, leaving behind familiar streets, old shadows, and ghosts that no longer held power. Laura wasn't running from the past. She was choosing, every day, to move forward. If Laura's story touched you in any way, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what doors do you need to close to find your peace? Remember, rebuilding yourself is not a sign of weakness, it's proof of courage. It doesn't matter how many times you've fallen, what matters is the strength with which you choose to get back up. If you enjoyed this story and want more content that inspires transformation and resilience, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that starting over is possible. Your new beginning can start now.